When you're starting a company, you labor in obscurity for what feels like years. You tell your friends what you're working on and they kind of glaze over or don't understand. No one recognizes the name. And you wonder, who am I doing this for?
I think I remember writing 30 different bullet points about why it wouldn't work.
At that point, DVDs were a rich man's game.
Well, the worst thing that can happen is you divvy up the DVDs and you come home.
Are we actually going to make it?
And he said, I don't know why you're taking this job. They're only shipping 2,000 a day and they need to ship 100,000 just to break even. That'll never happen.
At that time, the studios thought, oh, there's going to be a huge amount of piracy.
We all believed in it early on, and maybe blindly.
Your parents and your spouse are looking at you like, why are you doing this? You say, oh, because I believe.
Netflix began mailing DVDs in those red envelopes back in 1997. Today, it brags about being the world's leading internet television network.
The company, better known for renting and streaming movies, is offering TV viewers a whole new way to enjoy first-run shows.
And the Oscar goes to Icarus, Brian Fogel and Dan Kogan.
Thanks to Ted Sarandos, Lisa Nishimura, and Adam Del Dio, our incredible partners at Netflix.
And the Oscar goes to Roma!
Streaming giant Netflix won big at the Oscars last night with its film Roma taking home 3 of the Golden Trophies.
Well, and it's changing Hollywood. I mean, look what happened. Disney and Fox, their studios won a lot of awards last night. They're merging because Disney's about to launch their own streaming service that they're hoping is going to compete with Netflix, and Apple in the next few weeks, they're going to launch their own streaming service.
Me all I've ever desired. The money on my mind, the money got my mind. Got my mind.
As we approach the 21st century, a new means of communication is emerging. One day we will all be connected to the internet.
When I was at Berkeley in the 80s, I had a roommate who was a computer science guy. And he said, okay, hey, Corey, you got a Mac, you got a modem. Oh, let me show you this thing called the internet. Whatever your weird ass little hobby or favorite thing is, you're gonna find 2,000 other people who love that same thing. And that was hugely powerful.
In 1981, only 213 computers were hooked to the internet. As the new year begins, an estimated 2.5 million computers will be on the network, serving as many as 20 million people.
Back in the olden days, before the internet and technology companies created instant millionaires, publicly traded companies were judged on old-fashioned metrics of profitability and reliable returns. And Netscape really sort of reset investor expectations and really marked the beginning of the dot-com boom era.
Has the 1990s boom shattered old assumptions about how the economy works?
The internet evolved into a commercial phenomenon. Since 1991, the economy has expanded in what's about to break the record as America's longest boom.
And it really did mark the beginning of Silicon Valley's first wave of investment speculation. Investors were drawn to the market, not necessarily by underlying market fundamentals, but rather by the promise or the promise of a technology.
At least at the time, it was so nuts working at Netscape that we had financial advisors
sending out alerts saying, listen, if you've got a Netscape bumper sticker on your car, take that off, because people are jumping in front of vehicles because they assume that it's billionaires driving them and people are looking for payouts.
Some of these celebrities of the tech industry sort of distilled what American culture loves the most: youth and brashness. Nerdy dudes who might have struggled to get a date in high school were suddenly rock stars in the eyes of the media world. Jeff Bezos was finding himself on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
Was that initial excitement all just a fictitious, if thrilling, children's story? Or is the next chapter for Steve Jobs likely to be his gaudiest?
He was in disgrace in Silicon Valley. He had been booted from his own company, and he had received a call from an old friend of his, George Lucas at Pixar. George was going through a divorce and needed to raise some money pretty quickly. So he actually went and met with Lucas and saw some promise in the technology that Pixar was cultivating at the time. It was just animating commercials, but he saw that there was the opportunity for storytelling and for him to make his mark in Hollywood.
When Toy Story came out, Toy Story was treated like a foreign object, more than a precious, here's a precursor to the future.
I think it is fair to say that Hollywood was blindsided by the success that was Toy Story, its enormous box office performance.
Well, you know, Toy Story has really exceeded our expectations. It's about 180 million right now, I think, at domestic box office. It's being released internationally as we speak.
Yeah, well, if you hadn't shown up your stupid little cardboard spaceship and taken away everything that was important to me. Don't talk to me about importance. Because of you, the security of this entire universe is in jeopardy. What?
I would argue that Woody, the cowboy, and Buzz, the brash space explorer, are sort of emblematic of Silicon Valley and Hollywood, which needed one another, but were apprehensive about one another.
So the Netflix story, actually, as most of these stories do, begins quite a distance in the past.
Back in the early days, Mark actually worked for Reed Hastings at a company called Pure Atria.
Reed also lived where I lived. He lived in Santa Cruz. And a bunch of us every day would carpool to work. So not only was I working for Reed, but also I was getting to know him reasonably well in this 1 hour commute each direction from Santa Cruz over to Sunnyvale.
Mark called me one night and he said, listen, Christina, I have found this great company. We're gonna do corporate marketing. It's gonna be 9 to 5, come have fun. And I right away said yes. 5 days later, he said, I have some news.
Our big software company was acquired by an even bigger company. I didn't get a job with the new company, I was fired. And I smile here because I was fired in that wonderful kind of Silicon Valley, golden handcuffs-y kind of way. And what happens in that case is they come to you and say, Mark, we're no longer gonna need your service, but you need to stick around for maybe 6 months helping us figure this out in case you have a question. And I go, that sounds actually pretty good to me. And I said, I'm delighted, I'm gonna actually use this opportunity to start my next company. And Reed, he was being made redundant, but unlike me, Reed said, I don't think I want to start another company. Reed, I would believe, really wanted to try and change the world of education. But once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. And Reed said he wanted to keep his hand in, so to speak.
So Reed called me into Mark's office and Reed looked at us and said, I'm gonna be your angel. I'm giving you $2 million to start a company.
This is back in 1996, 97. The internet was still in its infancy then. But people were starting to experiment with selling things over the internet.
At that point in time, the only thing on the internet was entertainment, finances, shopping. Amazon was not even 2 years old. And so we started looking at big markets. And Mark was particularly interested in what was going to shift. And so we started looking at all the brick and mortar businesses.
The day-to-day reality of actually how this ideation and then validation happened is it would happen in the car. Reed and I had an hour ride to Sunnyvale every day, and then we had an hour ride back. And so he'd pick me up at my house up in Scotts Valley, which is just north of Santa Cruz, and I'd hop in and we'd get in the car, and almost immediately we'd jump into talking about ideas. And eventually we kind of stumbled on video. We said, but what about rental? That's an $8 billion business. And even better, people hate it.
According to Consumer Electronics magazine, video is clearly on the verge of a mass market breakthrough.
By the end of 1982, there were 5 million video cassette recorders in the United States. Sony Corporation is projecting a total of 40 million video cassette recorders in the U.S. by 1990, an increase of 800% in only 8 years. As this growth takes place, it will create a demand for convenience video stores. Stores that'll provide video equipment, accessories, software, and rental movies to a neighborhood customer base much the same way that convenience food stores provide groceries and other items today.
My dad was a serial entrepreneur, and in around 1980, he opened the first video rental store in Louisiana, a town called Lafayette, Louisiana, and it started as a wall in a pharmacy and bought 70 movies and put it on the wall and had the pharmacist kind of rent them out to people, and it took off so much that eventually the pharmacy became a video store, and that video store became 5 more video stores, and eventually became a franchise.
Independent stores popped up all over the country, and not only were they renting VHS tapes, but a lot of them were renting the VCRs because it was so expensive to buy one. A lot of people couldn't afford them.
You have to remember, in the early 80s, most people didn't know what video rental was. This was a new concept to everybody. People didn't know that you could actually own a VCR device that could play movies, and there's a place where you could go and rent them. So one of the things my parents would do with the stores is create events to draw people into the store and then kind of expose them to all the options and kind of the movie consumption that could happen there. So they would do things like, for kids, have a strawberry shortcake day and have somebody dressed as strawberry shortcake who could come in, and kids could come and take pictures and sign autographs, and they could highlight all the different kid-friendly movies that the store had. Or when a new title came out, they could have a theme around that title, like MASH.
Your options at that time were supermarkets, some convenience stores rented them. There was a lot of independents, and the independents typically were small operations and not great real estate, which really provided the opportunity for the superstore concept later on.
Pre-Blockbuster, most video stores were small mom and pop operations. In bad strip centers, the interiors were nothing fancy. The movie selections often were really bad. You were lucky if they had 1 or 2 copies of the top new release. You would see huge Playboy displays in the middle of a store, which for a store that would have kids movies and family movies to then suddenly have a giant Playboy display, now looking back, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, which is one of the really smart things that Blockbuster did when they launched, was taking that element out of the stores and really focusing on being a family-friendly environment.
Welcome to Blockbuster Video. Blockbuster Video gives you over 10,000 videos to choose from in over 30 different categories.
The story is kind of legendary in the video industry, is that David Cook had opened one of the first true video superstores. There were others in the country, but he opened one in Dallas.
And then Blockbuster came along and literally decided they were going to be the superstore of video stores. And they did it through having more titles, more copies of the new releases.
The great thing about Wayne Huizenga and the start of Blockbuster is that he knew how to ramp up a business unbelievably fast. When Huizenga bought the Blockbuster chain from David Cook in Dallas, the first thing he did, he started buying chains because he knew that he couldn't open stores fast enough. He had to open corporate stores, he had to open franchise stores, and he had to acquire stores. And that's how he was going to take over the business. And his whole plan from day one was to take it national and do it faster than anybody else.
Imagine the perfect video store. It would have a great selection, right? Right, over 10,000 videos, 3 evening rentals, so no rush, no hassle, fast checkout, 24-hour quick drop return, open late every night. Well, the perfect video store.
Welcome to Blockbuster Video.
Is popping up all over the country. There's one near you.
Blockbuster Video. Wow, what a difference.
There was a business model in place at the time that I later called managed dissatisfaction, because the popular wisdom in the video business was people come to a video store, they don't expect to get the movie that they want, they'll trade off to a different movie, they'll rent that, and they'll come back 2 weeks later and rent the movie that they want because they now can get it because demand is lessened.
Hi, how's it going today?
It started out okay.
Well, when you got a good video, it's bound to get better. Take care.
My day will get better when this line starts moving.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we were disrupting was waiting in line, walking up to a 17-year-old who had no customer service experience, who was trying to sell you popcorn when all you wanted to do was rent a movie that wasn't there.
Being mad when the 5 movies were already gone, and then having to pay your late fees.
So we started looking at who was renting movies at that time. The biggest was Blockbuster.
And it turns out there's probably a pretty good reason why you didn't want to do video rental as an e-commerce play. And the reason is the VHS cassette. They are big, and they are heavy, and they're not very durable.
The movie studios, their concept was, okay, we'll put movies out on a VHS tape, but it's going to cost the consumer up to $100. Because from their perspective, if a whole lot of people can watch it, we're going to get a lot for it.
And you can make back $100 on a rental when you're turning it every day. But we wanted to try mailing things. So we knew we had 2 or 3 days mailing it out, and they keep it for a week or whatever, and then they mail it back. That wasn't going to work. And video rental by mail went the way of all of our other ideas, which is discarded.
The innovations that come in different technologies usually come from some entrepreneur, somebody who sees an opening. The question is only, are the studios run with enough sophistication to spot the trends and jump into them early?
One day, Reed read about a technology that was being test marketed in San Francisco and some other cities called the DVD. And the DVD was this small, light, thin medium for movies. And we were going, that's really kind of interesting.
When DVD launched, the studios realized, hey, there is a market for us to sell these direct to consumers, and in some ways, take power away from the video stores and have our own relationship with consumers and just sell direct.
I really remember it completely like it was yesterday, that Reed and I were probably halfway up over the mountains to Sunnyvale as we were talking about this, and we said it was an easy way to figure out whether this is going to work or not. And we turned the car around and we drove back down into Santa Cruz and parked downtown and went to one of the used record stores in downtown Santa Cruz and went in and bought a used music CD, and then went 2 doors down to a stationery store and bought a little envelope, the kind of envelope that you would use to mail a greeting card in, and put the CD in the envelope, addressed it to Reed's house in Santa Cruz, and then we walked to the other end of the mall and went to the Santa Cruz post office and went up and bought a stamp and then dropped it in the slot and then drove to the office. And didn't think too much more about it. But I think it was the very next morning and Reed comes to pick me up and he didn't even need to say anything. He just kind of handed me this envelope with an unbroken CD in it that had gotten from the Santa Cruz post office to his house in just one day. And I think that was the very moment when Reed and I said, this just might work. So we got to this point in about September of 1997 where it was put up or shut up. Reed wrote us a big check. My mother actually wrote a check. Some other friends wrote small checks, and that was the start. Now, where you start from is a different question. After all those years of me having to drive from Santa Cruz up over the mountains to Silicon Valley, damn it, I was gonna try and have a company actually that I could get to in less than 50 minutes. So, Scotts Valley it is. But our very first office was not actually an office at all. There's a Best Western in Scotts Valley. We made an arrangement with the Best Western manager, considering he didn't have many conferences, that we could use his conference room as our very first Netflix office. And eventually decided we need a little bit more space.
When we set up our offices in Scotts Valley, we were in a small office park. We brought in folding tables, we brought in beach chairs. We did go and buy computers and bring those in. We had green carpeting, which we thought was lucky because it was the color of money.
It was about the size of an average house.
It was messy with papers everywhere and drawings of the system and how it was supposed to look like.
Yeah, in fact, we were so cheap, we actually kept the DVDs wrapped in their cellophane in case we ordered too many and had to return them, because we were just making it up as we went.
So we had this old, I guess it must have been a bank, because we had this old bank vault in there, like a big steel round door. That's where we put all the DVDs.
The funny thing is that we copied Blockbuster in every step of the way, and we actually used Blockbuster shelves in our bank vault. At the time when we launched Netflix, there were only 3,000 DVDs in circulation, so we had to have at least one copy of 3,000 different DVDs. Well, when you put one copy and more of 3,000 DVDs in a 1,000 square foot space, that's a problem.
But I did realize it would be helpful to have someone who had at least an inkling what the video business was all about. Then began this 6-month courtship of Mitch Lowe.
And now, here's a special announcement from the Video Software Dealers Association. From every major studio and independent video supplier to distributors, accessory companies, and thousands of video retailers.
The industry association that was the Video Software Dealers Association, it had a board, and Mitch was on that board.
I was going, I've got to get this guy involved. I've got to get him to help us.
I was just like totally fascinated by Mark and Reed. They were, I had been working behind the counter in a video store for, I think by that time, 14,000 hours, talking movies with people. And here were two guys who knew technology and knew marketing. And so all I wanted to do was to work with them.
Our introduction to Mitch and Mitch coming on and teaching us the video rental business was the key to us feeling confident that we could go into that space. He introduced us to studios, he brought us to events. Mitch gave us all of that background information so that we could create a web store that matched their experience going into a physical store.
The intellectual stimulation of just interfacing with Mark and Christina were great. We were battling it out, and I was the naysayer. Hey, let's just start with the number one thing. This thing's gonna break in the mail.
As with any of these things, we were incredibly lucky in our ignorance, because it turns out that the post office has a totally different mail flow for local mail. So local mail gets pulled out of the stack and they go, oh, it's in the Santa Cruz post office, it's for Santa Cruz, so we're just gonna put it right into the mail carrier's route and off it goes to the person's house. What we didn't realize is that once we began trying this at scale, that mail wasn't no longer working that way. It was now going to a central post office.
We put our first disc test in the mail and through the machines, that the envelope machine is a 40,000 letter per minute steel drum roll separator. You can imagine all these envelopes from all over the world sticking together. They had a machine that would make sure you separated the envelopes together so, the sticky parts of the envelope didn't stick. Imagine your disc going through there. It was crushed. I actually thought we had failed when I found out that all envelope mail went through that machine.
But it just goes to show that sometimes you're lucky in your ignorance. If that first disc had been mailed in Sunnyvale, that it might have gone through the mail, it might have cracked, and Reed might have come in the morning and said, oh, there's another one. Let's think of something new.
So what we discovered was if we could package the DVD properly and we could barcode it properly, we would know with certainty that that DVD was going through the machine that we wanted it to go through, and it would not get broken at the US Post Office.
One of the first things that we needed to do when we started setting up offices out in Scotts Valley was we needed to incorporate the company. And so we had to come up with a name. And so Mark named us Kibble because he always said that we needed to make sure that we were building something where the dogs would eat the dog food.
One day in one of our whiteboarding sessions, we decided we needed a better name for the company.
To start, you've got to come up with something which is evocative and creates emotion and communicates what it is you're trying to do and signals what market you're playing in. But there's some other more mundane requirements. It's got to be a name that you can actually get the domain name, the .com for. It's got to be a name that ideally you can trademark. It's got to be a name that's not being used someplace. It's got to be a name that doesn't mean something deeply offensive in some other language.
And so it had to say internet, and it had to say movies. And so we spent a very short amount of time going into Mark's office, and on one side of the whiteboard, we'd list all the things you would call the internet. And then on the other side of the whiteboard, we'd list how do you refer to entertainment, movies, video.
There were several names. There were 30 names on the board, and we did the classic exercise of who likes what, and eventually we stumbled on Netflix.
Netflix actually had a yes in all the columns, except someone else had Netflix CKS. And the other problem, of course, is people always find problems, and they were saying, well, Flix, doesn't that kind of remind you of Skin Flix?
I actually thought Netflix at first was a bit too almost porn-related, the Flix part of it. I didn't like it because of that.
We came to a day where we had to make up our minds. We just had to name it.
And so Netflix it was. And you know, it's kind of grown on me.
It was a very interesting proposition launching this new service.
Before we launched, Mark actually sent the very first Netflix DVD to himself just to test the process. He sent himself Casino.
Everybody's got to watch everybody else. And the eye in the sky is watching us all.
No one was watching us. That let us fly under the radar before we launched.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that when Netflix launched in the 90s, Hollywood was really fat and happy. And no one really thought much about this little threat coming from Northern California.
Launch day comes, and for us it was on April 14th, 1998, and we all had gathered in my conference room. And we had a table set up at one end with a computer on it, and Eric Meyer, CTO, had set it up so every time an order came in, a bell would ring. And at the other end of the room, we had set up a big table, and we had champagne and champagne glasses, and we were all set to kind of toast our success.
That challenge of launching the company, introducing something to the world that nobody had ever known that they wanted, that was exciting. That was exactly why I do startups. I knew where to go to find the first set of customers for Netflix. I knew what the online groups, the forums were. I knew who the influencers were in each of those. And if I could get them on our side, I knew that we could launch with just an unprecedented goodwill and enthusiasm and excitement.
And as we were kind of getting ready for the launch, which was at 9 a.m. sharp, we were all kind of placing bets on what was going to happen. And so 9 o'clock came around, and Eric leans over and hits a few keys on the keyboard, and we're live. And then we're all kind of looking around expectantly, and all of a sudden, ding, our first order, and everyone cheers, and we all go over and begin breaking open the champagne, and mid-pour, ding, ding, like 2 more orders, and we all cheer again.
The entire Netflix website is just engulfed in people. I mean, just orders of magnitude, greater numbers of visitors than the team had predicted.
And then ding, 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 and we cheer again. And then we're all waiting and waiting and waiting.
We were watching what's happening, and then the server started going down. So it was kind of short-lived, the excitement of the first day.
We didn't have enough capacity. We were sending people to Fry's Electronics to buy more computers.
We bought about 10 machines, I remember.
In addition to the 2 that you only have.
In addition to the only 2 that we have already in the office.
Boom, melts down again. And it just keeps happening, these cascading failures, because it's such a huge success, because it was just exactly what that community wanted.
You had people ripping open cellophane packages and just throwing boxes all over the place, because you didn't need the box. Once you opened it, we weren't shipping the box to the customers. We were just shipping the discs. It was that kind of chaos.
We were trying to figure out how you put a "sorry, we're closed" sign on an internet store. We did not know what to do. We were wildly successful on launch day.
And we closed that first day with 108 orders. I mean, that was my budget for the whole first month. I couldn't believe that like 100 people had ordered from us.
I first heard about Netflix from my partner, Sam Bloom, who was running business development at the time. He came in my office and said, there's a new startup called Netflix, and they're delivering DVDs through the mail. And truth be told, at the time, I was like, okay, interesting. We'll start keeping an eye on it, because at the time I ran competitive analysis across our competitors, so we started to track Netflix at that point.
So that first summer was actually pretty good. We were actually starting to get business. We were starting to get traction. And I think it was sometime at the end of that first summer that we had our first $100,000 month. And that was a big accomplishment, because a $100,000 month is $1 million annual run rate. The bad news was that almost all of that $100,000 was selling DVDs.
It was about that time that Reed Hastings, while he was on our board and our angel funder, he also came in and was spending a little bit more time with us in the offices. His biggest concern was that selling movies was going to be a problem.
That was bad, because we knew it was just a matter of time before Amazon sold DVDs, and then Walmart would sell DVDs, then your local gas station would sell DVDs, and this nice, healthy business would have its margins taken out from underneath it, and it would go to nothing, and we'd be out of business. So now rental, that was a great business in that it had potentially high margins, really defensible, but nobody wanted to do it. We could barely get someone to rent once, so we'd never hear from them again. And even worse was doing both of them at the same time was brutally difficult. I mean, if you think about it, you'd come to our website and you'd be instantly confused. Well, we rent movies and we sell movies. And then some of the titles could be only sold. Some of the movies could be only rented, and some could be both. I mean, think of the checking out. We had to set up a system that allowed someone to buy a movie, but also to rent a movie. And then the warehouse had to be able to package some of them in packaging to go out and stay out, and some went in packaging to go out and come back. And we kind of came to this realization that if we were going to be successful, we had to focus. We had to pick one thing and do it well. But of course, that then begs the question, well, which one? Do you bet everything on selling, which is paying 99% of the salaries, but over a matter of time is going to go down to zero? Or do you bet everything on rental, which if you can make it work, could be a great business, but there is no indication whatsoever that that's going to happen? When you decide overnight to walk away from 99% of your revenue, it has a way of focusing your mind on the problem. There comes a point, even when you're testing exhaustively, that you begin to run out of time and you begin to run out of money. And we were getting to the end of the rope, and we still had 3 big things that we wanted to try. So one thing we had noticed was we have this huge warehouse and it's full of DVDs. Maybe we could store them at the customers' houses. Maybe they just keep them, and then when they're ready for another one, they mail it back and we'll give them another one. That could be kind of interesting. And we have another idea. Right now, when someone mails one back, they've got to come back to the website and pick their next movie. Well, that's pretty awkward. No one does that. So how about if we have them make a list of all the movies they want, and then we know when a movie comes back, we'll send the top one on the list. We'll call that the queue. And we say, but why does it have to be a la carte? Maybe we just set up some program where you can do it as often as you want, these exchanges, and we'll charge you a monthly subscription fee. And Reed, in his impatience, goes, we're not going to test these sequentially. We're out of time. Come on, chop, chop. We're going to test all 3 of these at the same time. So we launched this 3 programs at once, and amazingly, it worked. All of a sudden, people are renting. And not only are they renting, they're coming back. And they let us hit their credit card the next month, and the next month. And they're sticking around. And that was the moment where we kind of stopped being a startup and kind of realized we've figured something out.
If you don't watch a lot of movies, you may never learn certain valuable things, like what to do when an animal talks to you.
Hey kids, Jimmy needs your help down by the lake.
It talks. Kill it.
No, wait, Jimmy.
Let's make a hat out of it.
Hold on. Everybody take a deep breath.
Let's cook it and eat it.
But if you watched a lot of movies, you'd know.
Hey kids, Jimmy needs your help down by the lake.
Let's go help Jimmy. Thanks, Prairie Dog.
Netflix, all the DVDs you want, $20 a month, and no late fees.
I was in the home video industry, and I learned about Netflix the way most people in the world did. I bought a DVD player, and I opened up a DVD player, and there's an offer for Netflix, which I had never heard of at the time. But I was intrigued by what they were doing professionally, so signed up and was blown away by the DVD through the mail service.
One of the biggest things that we did, which triggered this recognition at this early days, was trying to jump on top of current events. And there was one particular current event that we thought would be a great thing to latch onto.
I'm not going to answer that question because I believe it's a question about conduct that whatever the answer to it is, does not bear on the perjury, because oral sex performed on the opponent under this definition is not sexual relations.
We found out one afternoon that, lo and behold, all the testimony was actually going to be released of President Bill Clinton's testimony in the Monica Lewinsky case. And we said, this is fantastic. Let's do a DVD.
So we actually made that DVD as an exclusive for our customers to see if anybody wanted it.
I had never seen any title fly off the shelf like that before. Every single order had a Clinton Lewinsky DVD in it, and we were the only ones who had it, and it was great for PR because suddenly we were on the map. And a lot of people were signing up because you couldn't order unless you signed up.
But first we had to actually get the DVD. And now Mitch was like pulling his hair out, trying to figure out how to make this happen, how to download the actual material, how to get those that material to a DVD mastering company, how to get the master made, and then how to have it all duplicated. And he was under so much time pressure that we decided to cut some corners. And so one of the corners we decided to cut was we're gonna go without a label.
Unfortunately, the manufacturer who printed those discs got them mixed up with some Chinese porn that they were printing for presumably a different customer, and we ended up mailing those out.
Then we begin getting these very curious emails. They're saying, I'm not sure this is what you meant to send me. We're going, huh?
We thought, surely that can't be right. Here, give me one of those discs, let's try. And then, oh my God, what is going on?
And so we sent out a full spindle of Chinese pornography to people who were requesting President Clinton's Monica Lewinsky testimony. And in some ways, now, it wasn't that far off.
The open-handedness, the open-heartedness, just saying, well, that was a big mistake. We're super sorry. And the recovery was quick and honest and sincere, which then led to another sort of brand expansion where people said, oh, these Netflix kids, you know what? When they make a mistake, they own up to it and they rectify it quick. And that remains an attribute in place to this day.
So when the dot-com boom happened, it was also boom times for advertising agency because all of those brands all of a sudden really needed agency partners to help them develop their campaign. They had huge budgets, and many of them actually had their eye on the Super Bowl.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
EDS, managing the complexities of e-business.
Ooh, girl, I just want you to stay.
Early on, I think we didn't invest in marketing and branding like most early internet companies did. We invested everything in the customer experience.
And it's sort of ironic that the more successful a company gets, the more money it needs. If you're adding customers like crazy, you lose money on customers in the first few months. It takes a while to recover that. And so as you're successful, the needs for financing are dramatically emphasized. Unfortunately, that was accelerating into a time when it was a very bad time to try and raise money.
It's described as nothing short of breathtaking, a points drop never before seen on the US markets. This closing bell might as well have been an alarm, so savage was the selling. Technology stocks even harder hit, the Nasdaq index in freefall down nearly 10%. It lost a quarter of its value in just 1 week.
Well, advertising has played a big role in the growth of most brands, including all of these tech brands. So, interestingly, advertising probably sped the death of a lot of bad .com products. So nothing kills a bad idea more than getting 100 million people to take a look at it right away and decide that it really doesn't do anything of value.
When the .com bubble burst, and all of a sudden, all of the mad money that had been spent on Super Bowl commercials, the 17 commercials went down to 3, and E-Trade had a little bit of fun at its own industry's expense in a spot that captured the detritus of the .com era.
One of the concepts in investment in the Valley is the critical importance of who's running the company. It was obvious to Reed and myself and our board and other people that Reed had a very, very different profile amongst the investment community than I did.
Reed Hastings sort of recognized this kind of frothy environment in Silicon Valley of the late 90s. He used to joke that you could walk around with a tin can and have people drop $50 million on you. And after the bottom fell out in 2000, that was not the case.
And it was clear that if we were going to successfully raise the money we needed to get to the next level, that it probably was going to take someone like Reed.
I just remember when Reed started and a lot of buzz in the office and a lot of people trying to understand what was going on. Was Mark being outed? Was this disrespect in some way? What was happening? Why were we shifting?
It was difficult when we started transitioning the team over to Reed's team. I felt bad for Mark because we didn't get to do everything we set out to do.
It's such a common story in Silicon Valley is the notion of you have the early stage entrepreneurs, people who have the vision, the drive, the madness to think they can actually change the world in whatever way. And then money people send in the designated grown-ups who can scale a business better.
And that ended up being, in retrospect, a smart thing for us to do. Because in fact, that was a time when if we had not raised that money, we would be gone. And we raised that money almost entirely on an interpersonal, one person saying, I'm willing to bet on another person. And that was certainly one of our close calls.
Almost 2001, and the technologies that bring us telephones, TV, and computers are merging.
5 years from now, we're not going to have distinct cable and telephone industries. There's going to be one industry, and there'll be companies carrying bits, little pieces of information from point A to point B.
There are also interactive TV channels where people order movies on demand instead of driving to the local video store.
Even though the video rental business was going pretty strong in 2000, we were really looking at other ways of delivering movies and content to people.
This is a demonstration of the graphic user interface for the Blockbuster Enron video on demand service.
Along about 2000, a company called Enron came to visit us. And they basically said, it was a very simple proposition. We'll provide all the technology, all you have to do is get the content for us.
On the right-hand side of the screen, again, there's several categories. Just In is basically, as we click on it, it is a listing of the most recent additions to the service.
Enron had these set-top boxes invented, and we actually installed them in people's homes in the San Francisco Bay Area. Well, some of the boxes actually caught on fire in people's homes. And not long after that,
congressional hearings begin this morning in the Enron investigation.
Enron's fired Arthur Andersen auditor David Duncan will take the Fifth Amendment today. Members want to question him about his role in the destruction of financial documents.
And that was the beginning of it in a matter of days when it all blew up.
Guilty verdicts in the biggest case of corporate fraud in history. 38 counts of fraud and conspiracy.
Lawyers for Jeffrey Skilling and Kenneth Lay threw around complicated notions about margin calls and short selling.
So in the fall of 2000, Netflix was about 2.5 years old. And by some measures, we were doing pretty good. We had just finished a year approaching $5 million in revenue. And in fact, 2000 looked like it could be a year north of $30 million in revenue. Now, the bad news was we had accumulated losses exceeding $50 million. And if you can remember what 2000 was like, that was not a good climate to have lost $50 million. And so, being prudent entrepreneurs like we are, we decided this was the time to pursue some strategic alternatives. In other words, how do we get the hell out of this one? And the obvious strategic alternative was Blockbuster. And now Blockbuster was in a very, very different place. We were about to do 30 million, they were about to do 6 billion.
Blockbuster, circa 2000, we had just overcome some difficulties, got the business back on track, rental business was growing again. We were opening stores, and at that point, had about 8,000 stores internationally.
We were nothing to them. And so when we called Blockbuster trying to get a meeting, or when we called Blockbuster trying to explore this, nothing. Crickets. For months, until finally, about 2 months later, we were on retreat at a little ranch in the hills outside of Santa Barbara. And we took the whole company away. And you know, in Silicon Valley, people are pretty casual, but on retreat, even more so. And I think all that I really had with me was a couple of tank tops, and I had flip-flops, and I had shorts. And everyone else was dressed similarly. And of course, this is the moment when Ed Stead from Blockbuster calls Barry McCarthy and says, we'd love to see you tomorrow in Dallas. And we were not a rich company, but we chartered a private jet. And to paint this picture, I'm in a tank top and shorts and flip-flop, and Reed is in a Hawaiian shirt. So him and Barry McCarthy and I, we arrive in Dallas, and we take a car over to the Renaissance Tower. And for years, that was the biggest building in Dallas. And we get in the elevator, go up to the, 36th, 37th floor, and we come into this room, and it's a football field. And one of those huge, endangered hardwood board tables. I mean, everything short of having, rhinoceros heads on the wall.
So Blockbuster's headquarters were, I think, fairly typical for, a company that size. I wouldn't say palatial, but not Spartan either.
And the Blockbuster guys come in. It's John Antioco and Ed Stead. And he's wearing, a $73,000 suit. So stereotypical.
I can tell you quite categorically, I've never worn a suit to the Blockbuster office. So I have a feeling that whoever the guy was in the suit wasn't John Antioco.
And we all get around the table, and we talk, and we kind of make our pitch to them. We go, we think there is great synergy here. We could run your online business. You'd run the stores. This would be a great combination. But they finally said, so what do you think we should pay for you? And I remember Reed kind of screwing up his courage and doing the swallows. But he goes $50 million. I'm sure my memory's playing tricks, but I swear they were all kind of doing that little, holding a laugh in. And if they weren't, they may as well have been, because they found that so ridiculous.
I could see why someone like Ed would take a look at a business of Netflix, which was, I think, losing money at the time, in the midst of the dot-com bubble explosion, if you will, and say, I don't think that's something we want to mess with.
And so we slunk out quietly out of the building, tail between our legs, got back in the plane, this totally quiet ride back to Santa Barbara. And I swear to God, I remember sitting there going, oh God, now we're gonna have to kick their ass. And you know what the best part is? You know what the best part is.
When Netflix came on the scene, we felt vulnerable because of the messaging they were giving, because it was emphasizing the poor pieces of Blockbuster. But we couldn't work out economically how they were going to make it work. And we certainly didn't understand the subscription model. I mean, subscriptions? What are you talking about?
So I started to get concerned about Netflix when we took a trip to San Francisco. So we went up there to understand what was driving the subscription business and the movie industry itself. And so we took 50 Netflix customers and we interviewed them in focus groups. And what we heard was fantastic customer loyalty, even on product they had to wait 3, 4, 5 days for. What's interesting for us is our executive team at the time couldn't get their head around the fact that it wasn't sort of an immediate gratification. But what we heard from Netflix customers was, it is immediate gratification, it's in my house. And that for me was a sort of aha moment that said, no, this is actually instantaneous. It just takes a little bit of planning.
There was this wonderful young woman working in our fledgling sort of PR group. And I said, how are you doing today? And she started crying. And she said, if this company folds, it'll be the 5th one that's folded that I've worked with. And I don't know if I can do this again. And that's when it kind of hit me, that this is really real and personal for a lot of people.
We started running out of money, and we did, I don't know how many rounds of financing, 3, 4.
When companies go through rough patches, where all of a sudden you hit a point where what you expected to happen doesn't. The revenues don't come in. The new customers aren't acquired. And you have to adjust.
At some point, we had to let go of about 40% of employees. That was pretty tough.
The management framed that very well, that this is a rough time.
Every company needs to do this, and what we're doing is going to make us survive the long term.
The week leading up to Lyft, there were a lot of closed-door meetings, but all our rooms are glass. So there were a lot of suits, and Netflix at that time was very casual. I think a lot of us thought Blockbuster was going to buy us, or Microsoft was going to buy us, and people were like, oh, did we go to Seattle? And we were all trying to speculate. And then the morning of, I noticed there were Kleenex boxes in the glass rooms.
It was a necessity at that time to survive that full frontal attack. Every department had to cut a certain number of people to protect our cash flow.
It shocked people to their core.
And what makes it especially tough is that the people that you have to fire sometimes didn't do anything wrong, because these are people who quit their jobs to come and take on something unsurmountable.
I didn't think it was going to be me, but it was. And Reed talked to us, and we went in and had a meeting, and it was sad, because you love your job and you want to be there to see how it turns out.
I think a lot of us felt really dysfunctional for days afterward, just a massive amount of survivor guilt because we were so tight-knit.
And going around that room and asking people one after another into your office and they know what's coming just breaks your heart. But all I can do is to the people that I've brought in and said thank you and I'm sorry, is to have them feel the same pride that I do in what we all built together.
There's a better way to rent movies. As many as you want for just $20 a month and no late fees. Go to Netflix.com, make a list of the movies you want to see, and in about one business day, you'll get 3 DVDs. Keep them as long as you want, without late fees. Then when you're done, look, prepaid envelopes. Return one, and they'll send you another movie from your list. It's easy.
Netflix. All the movies you want, $20 a month, and no late fees.
The thing about late fees, two-edged sword. Late fees were great as a source of profit, but they were the single biggest irritation to a guest.
Forever, late fees are the most hated thing about video rental, and Blockbuster being the big player in the video rental business, we got the blame for late fees.
So we were now building up all of this horror of guests saying, I know I've got to go to Blockbuster because I've got nowhere else, but I don't like it. And then in comes Reed on his white Charger, and he says, these guys charge you late fees. We're going to figure that out. You're going to pay a subscription, have as much as you like. And to most people who didn't bother doing the math, they go, well, that's easy. I don't have to get out of my armchair. I don't pay late fees. And all this stuff gets delivered. And those guys down there who've been charging me a fortune forever, I don't want to do business with them anymore. And so we had to deal with that.
The most important thing we could do is enhance the brand image, because it was that brand that was going to launch us into the next level of this business, which was going to be digital delivery. So one of the rationales behind getting rid of late fees, it would be very popular with customers. It would eliminate the thing most dreaded about Blockbuster, but it was a major decision.
No more late fees, no more late fees, no more late fees, no more late fees, no more late fees.
What I remember most vividly is Nick Shepard and I walking out of the Blockbuster office after just seeing the rough cut of the commercial that we were going to announce the end of late fees. And all of a sudden they broke into song, "It's over."
Someday, you'll remember where you were when you first heard that there are no more late fees at Blockbuster. If you need an extra day or two with your movies or games, you go right ahead. Take them, relax, enjoy more time and less stress.
It's so beautiful.
Thank you. The end of late fees. The start of more. The new Blockbuster.
But as we were going out the door, I said to Nick, it's over stuff. I'm not sure if we're talking about late fees or our careers, but I guess we'll find out.
You don't do this job for the money. It's a long haul. The odds are extremely low that your company's going to survive, no less be a big success. But when everything goes right, it ends up aligning everybody in success.
I was even too young to really know what it was. I had never been in an IPO before.
I think everyone recognizes that an IPO is like high school graduation. It's big at the time, but with hindsight, it's only really a beginning of something else.
The celebrations might someday return to other Silicon Valley technology companies, but Netflix represents one of the few successes in an otherwise dissolute technology sector.
Oh my gosh, these numbers are just not the type of numbers you let yourself think about.
It's commonly the case when companies go public in Silicon Valley that a bunch of people make a lot of money and you start seeing fancy cars in the parking lot. That never happened at Netflix because we never felt that sort of success and prominence. We were under attack almost immediately by Walmart and then of course Amazon and Blockbuster.
From an online perspective, we were just looking at this small company growing double digits, almost triple digit growth in Netflix, but it was still pretty small at that period of time compared to a Hollywood or a GameStop with thousands of locations and $1 billion of sales.
We used to love when people wrote us off. There's a couple Antioco quotes where he said stuff about us being niche market. I think that's the line that we all used to always joke about. We were great because we didn't get attention. No one really was re-engineering us, and we loved it.
The customer affinity to that brand, the loyalty that brand had was so high, and the word of mouth on that product was so good that clearly we should address it.
Reed's sort of a big picture guy, and he wasn't worried about the pennies on a day-to-day basis. He knew that if he could get an installed base of users, that he could keep them and he could eventually figure out how to make money from them. And he would also be able to work with the studios to make it worthwhile for the studios. And so he went all out just to build a user base. Now that user base had to come from somewhere. Well, guess what? It was coming from us. And so on the one hand, we've got a model that the guests don't like, and on the other, he's got a model that the guests kind of like.
I mean, one of the biggest motivating factors was disrupting Blockbuster, making the world a better place to rent movies.
And actually, it took a guy like Shane, who eventually sat a number of us down and said, you got to think about this. Think about how this might play out. Think about the economics of not being in that business versus the economics of being in that business. And he made it brutally clear. If we didn't get into the online business and fast, our economics would tumble.
In 2002, we recognized we need to have an offering against Netflix. There's no question about that.
So after listening to a lot of heated debate for quite some time, I said, look, here's the way to solve this. I'm going to give Shane a budget, and as I recall, it was $25 million, and I'm going to say, get a small group of people, get an office, get off-site, and get this business going.
Luckily, our parent company, Viacom, owned a building down the road in an area of Dallas called the West End. And there was a building called the Paramount Building.
And so for us, it was like a gift, right? We get $25 million, we get the Blockbuster brand, and we get to get away from what you would consider to be sort of this corporate culture that may sort of hold down a startup business.
So for the Blockbuster Online team, we were part of this giant $6 billion company, but we really felt like we were the little guy going up against a giant. Everybody knew Netflix at the time.
We don't have any subscribers. They've got well over 1 million. We have no idea what we're doing. They're a well-operated machine. And we now have to figure out a way to build a culture that wants to attack them, that wants to kill them, basically.
And at the same time, you can't market in our stores, you can't use our customer list, you have to do this truly on your own.
So we had to come up with the best consumer proposition to compete against Netflix. So we came up with 2 main objectives. One was have more titles. They had 20,000 titles, we were gonna launch with 25,000 titles. And have an in-store component. You could get unlimited discs online and 2 free in-store rentals when we launched.
So we had to be scrappy. And so like David and Goliath, any rock we could find, we'd throw.
To get to 25,000 titles was no small feat. Now to get that many, there's just like not that many around. I think we had one that was like a fireplace burning on a television. We also were hampered a little bit because we couldn't put more risque movies out there. The Blockbuster brand was a family brand.
So we had a team of guys in our office who would watch these movies to make sure they were Blockbuster appropriate and approved.
So there were certain rules that we had at Blockbuster that you could have and you couldn't have. So for instance, you could have frontal nudity, but you couldn't have full frontal nudity.
So literally our film team would have to watch these movies through a hood. So you would walk through the hall and there would be a team of folks looking through a monitor, watching movies at high speed with headphones on to try to determine if they were Blockbuster appropriate or not. And the saddest thing in our office is when you would have a guy who would watch 2 hours of a movie, and then in the last few minutes you would hear him scream in agony because it would cross the threshold at the end of the movie.
We've got 6 months, and we are now going to reverse engineer Netflix. The first thing we do is just rip apart their website, obviously.
This was not a static website that you could just go in and copy the words and copy the layout and copy the pricing and think you've now caught us. What you're missing is the data. You're missing all that understanding that comes from knowing the reason why this headline is in 18-point type and this one's in 12 rather than vice versa.
Netflix had a huge head start on us from an online perspective. They knew how to acquire customers effectively. They knew how movie ratings and recommendations work. There was a lot of things that they knew that we basically had to try to learn in a condensed time period.
We made it so that when you showed up at a website, or I showed up, or someone else showed up, everyone got a different experience. It was personalized. And it wasn't just personalized based on what you might like as a movie. It was based on things like, what movies do we have in stock? It was based on, what movies do we have better financial terms on? It was based on, once we had regional hubs, which movie do we have in stock near you? And all these things would go into the choice that of course happens on the internet in an instant of what 10 movies we choose to pop up and have you pick from.
Obviously, the distribution operations was a big deal. They were starting to get overnight delivery, and everywhere they had overnight delivery, their penetration rates were significantly higher than when they didn't. So we sent people into their distribution centers. And we didn't do it under any false pretenses. We went there and said, we are subscribers of Netflix. We think it's fantastic. We saw where the return envelope was. We just wanted to check it out. And they opened the door and they let us in. Not only that, they let us take pictures. They described exactly how the discs came in. They described exactly how the discs went out. They described how they cycle counted the discs, how they kept track of the discs. It was a real good education for us. They did figure it out though, because we went back a couple more times and they finally said, no, we're done. You can't tour the facility any longer. Later, we actually hired a person from Netflix, and he was on a conference call with one of their operators, and they were not happy with the fact that Blockbuster got a carte blanche movement through their distribution centers.
What we learned was that Blockbuster had sent people in to look at our facility and see what we did, and we did the same thing. Not as much perhaps as they did, but at one point I sent some of my hub managers over to interview for jobs at Blockbuster, and they would give them the grand tour and then they'd come back and report it all. When our people looked at what Blockbuster was doing, it looked like it was 2 years behind what we were doing.
This machine is a standard first-class mail postal sorter that Netflix rebuilt to do many things. We put these DVDs in this machine, and the barcode on the DVD is read right there, and from there it's sorted for various purposes.
Netflix had a lot of media, and so obviously their PR strategy was brilliant. And one of the things they did is they had videos of their distribution centers out online. They also had a lot of photos of their distribution centers and the packing material and the machines that were kicking stuff in and out. So in fact, we used those pictures to call the same firm to build our machinery.
We knew that we had lots of press coming through, and to make sure no one knew where our automation came from, we relabeled all the equipment with fake names and fake cities so that if they went to go and try to buy it from there, they'd discover it doesn't exist.
Hey. Hey. Your movie came today. Alien, right? I'm not quite sure where Oh, what is this? What's happening to my... Ah! Oh, it's coming out of my... You're gonna like it.
So before we launched Blockbuster Online to the public, we had what's called a soft launch, which is basically the service was operational, not available to everybody, and we sent invites to limited friends and family and employees to stress test the system.
Funny enough, we see Reed Hastings sign up. We see Barry McCarthy sign up. So we see a whole bunch of Netflix URLs start to make its way into our Blockbuster Online sign up. And so I said, apparently we have their attention. It's July 2004, we're about to launch, and Netflix announces that they're gonna take their price up to $21.99. And we are like, it's Christmas. One, we have done all this market research that says anything above $20 is bad news. And two, we're gonna launch at $19.99 and be underneath them.
So I remember the launch day for Blockbuster Online.
We had organized a giant launch party at the Granada Theater in Dallas.
This is it! This
kept going fast.
We have this big launch party. We're not sure we should go to market yet or not.
The challenge was the site was maybe not quite ready for public consumption.
And so we launch, and every 30 minutes we have to restart our servers so the system stays up.
Literally, it was almost like the hamster turning the wheel behind the scenes to keep the site up.
They had a great brand. I mean, they were the one company that like we all feared. In fact, there was this analyst who still is out there, Michael Pachter, who called them like, we were like the little dog yapping at the heels of the big dog.
One of Reed's quarterly messages to the company was how to take down Blockbuster.
We needed to do a lot of work to figure out what flexibility we had on pricing. We had taken it up, and we were going to have to take it down.
And then Netflix drops their price to $17.99. We clearly now have their attention. So we now have to make a decision, what do we want to do? I want to drop the price point to $17.49.
Shane, that's kind of kissing your sister, right? If we're going to undercut them, let's go for it. $14.99. $14.99? You're crazy.
John was always a guy who wasn't afraid to move on price if he thought there was a big pickup in volume to be had.
We had an inferior product. We didn't have as many distribution centers. We couldn't get the movies to the people as fast as Netflix can.
John's logic is we don't have that many, they've got a lot, they can't drop the price to get us.
Netflix has 2 million members. If they drop their price $5, that's $10 million a month. That's about $120 million a year at their existing subscriber base. I don't think they'll do it.
You know, his bias was always just go straight to the customers, give them great value, give them a great, something that really plays back into a lower price. Lower price, more value, the customers will love it. I mean, that's that simple. Like, what is, don't overcomplicate it.
And as a matter of fact, let's go on the Super Bowl with a commercial at $14.99.
I'm gonna pick up a movie from Blockbuster.
Okay, drive safely.
Now Blockbuster is as close as your mailbox. Introducing Blockbuster Online. Choose your movies online, receive and return them by mail. Enjoy unlimited rentals and keep them as long as you want. Plus, get 2 free in-store rentals every month, all for just $14.99.
So I've got a BlackBerry. So every hour on the hour, I get an update as to how many subscribers we're getting on the Super Bowl itself.
And so literally in that next hour, we signed up the same number of subscribers we were normally seeing in a day. Then the next hour, that number doubled. Then the next hour, that number doubled. And basically, the day within the Super Bowl, we signed up as many people as we had signed up in the previous month.
And I remember looking at Ben and saying, we got something here.
With the price increase, there was two sides. There was circle the wagons and do what's right and let the model show that they couldn't handle it. And then of course the other option was to lower prices and get into a price war with Blockbuster.
Even assuming that they were as efficient as we were, we knew actually that those early months were going to cost them a lot, and they were aggressively underpricing us.
So we could model what Blockbuster was getting from their customers, but at the lower price, they were never breaking even. They were burning cash.
When we left Viacom, we had a board that was a pretty supportive board. And that all changed after the proxy fight.
Motorola is a perfect example of how Carl Icahn operates. He's been making demands in order to jolt up the sagging stock price. First one, dump the CEO. That happened in December. Then break up the company.
All Carl could see was, you guys are very expensive, you make a lot of money. And so, when we were talking to them about how we're saving costs, I remember talking to them about how we were closing stores and integrating stores and how that saved money and there was like, we don't believe your numbers.
His goal is always the same, to reap a hefty profit for himself. He's been successful, say Wall Streeters, because he's intimidating and relentless.
So now you have Carl coming in with a couple of his guys, didn't listen to anything. And Carl, I mean, you couldn't get Carl to kind of focus on anything. And so they didn't come in and say, let me understand your business. They came in to tell us how to run a business. And, I can remember sitting in the first board meeting, which was meant to be an acclamation meeting, help them understand the business. I don't think I'd got into slide 2 before these guys are like throwing ideas and you guys haven't tested this and you should be doing that. And one of the guys said, people buy jeans. Why don't you take some movies off the wall and put jeans on the wall? And you go, genius. I wish I'd thought about that one.
We had launched our online service, and I was desperately looking for a way to leverage the stores as part of that online service. So in a meeting with Shane, we talked about, wouldn't it be nice if our online customers could exchange their movies in our stores?
Our observations and our research showed that this was actually really interesting to consumers, the idea that you could get a movie in the mail and take it into the store and immediately get another movie. One of the things that we always knew about our services is that you couldn't get instant gratification. You actually had to wait for the mail, and we optimized our distribution centers so that it would be one day each way, but that's as good as it would be. Well, you could just drive to the store and do it. So that was actually scarier.
We've read the results. The results are fantastic. We've put the media together to launch Total Access. We do a big to-do with Jessica Simpson in November, where John and Jessica go out there and she talks about how Total Access is the best thing ever.
They hired Jessica Simpson to be a spokesperson. Netflix couldn't afford a celebrity of her caliber at the time. So this was a pretty intense competition.
I never understood the financial market's support of Blockbuster through it all. I mean, they kept giving them money, and we were struggling month to month, but we had the better model.
We had, I want to say, 500,000 subs. It might have been 750,000 subs in 2 months, and absolutely put Netflix on their heels. And so we now get into the first quarter, and they go negative for the first time in their history. In the second quarter, we pick up 115% of the market share. We have absolutely got them dead to rights.
I mean, at the time, the stock went down to $1.50. There was a lot of questions if we were going to survive 3 major attacks from Amazon, Blockbuster, and Walmart. But we were confident in what we had modeled.
We always believed that anybody could get into this, but that nobody else could make money and offer the service as successfully as we did.
Thank you. Change is inevitable, and some people fight it, and some people embrace it.
Sundance at Blockbuster was a pretty big deal.
So we went every year. We got to meet with the studios.
And for me, what it was is, hey, this is an opportunity for Blockbuster to intermingle with the film community, to look at opportunities to acquire content, and quite frankly, to kind of relax and do a little skiing when we weren't working.
Once we started getting kind of big, we would take the whole company out to Sundance. People going on skiing trips and taking lessons and coordinating huge dinners for everyone. And, it was a lot of fun.
Netflix had made Sundance one of their key pillars early on, and they would take lots of employees there. So we wanted to see what type of vibe was around Netflix at Sundance.
So we were strolling down the streets of Sundance. It was one of my favorite times of the year, bask in all that Hollywood kinds of stuff. I was walking with Nick Shepard and his phone rang. And so I said, hey, Nick, what was that about? It was Matthew Smith. He just got a call from Ted over at Netflix, and Reed would like to see you. He does? I said, okay. So I guess set it up and I'll go see Mr. Hastings.
You have to understand, Netflix just won't even recognize that we have an online business, right? So it was very Blockbuster who.
I mean, Reed said a lot of things that were basically poo-pooing Blockbuster's ability to get into this business.
But that particular Sundance, so we just had a couple of quarters where we sort of whooped on Netflix.
We put 1 million subs on in 6 months, which is the fastest subscription business to 1 million people you've ever seen. And so we finally have their attention.
Next day, it's off to see Mr. Hastings, and we drive to his villa, and I enter the premise, and Reed says, hi, John, congratulations. I said, what's that about, Reed? He said, Total Access, having an impact.
Both Netflix and Blockbuster Total Access give you the convenience of movies delivered right to your home. Except with Netflix, to get new movies you can only return by mail and wait. But with Blockbuster Total Access,
hey, I don't have to wait.
You can also return movies at the store and exchange them for new ones, no extra charge.
So you get new movies faster.
Yay, more movies!
Total Access was different. It was really problematic because Blockbuster was leveraging an asset the stores that we didn't have, and we had no way to match that.
And at that point, he said, well, you guys really don't have any business being in this business, so why don't we just buy your subscribers?
The thing was, we'd lost our confidence because here these insurgents had come into our business. They were picking us off because of things we'd done in the past, things we hadn't got right, and they were making a kind of big deal of stuff like late fees and all of this sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden, no, we're stopping them stealing our business. Now we're getting it right and they can't get it right. So we felt pretty good about that. So now confidence is starting to come back because you go, there's a future for our business. they're wrong. We can get this business really motoring.
I personally never had an interest in selling it, but felt like I had an obligation to talk to the board about it.
John calls me and he says, Netflix has made an offer. We need to go talk to the board. At the time, a lot of those board meetings were in New York in Carl's office. Carl asked me, he said, well, what do you think? And I said, I wouldn't sell at this point because we're pushing them so hard that they're either gonna pay more later or we're gonna be profitable. One of those two things is about to happen, Carl. At 5 million subscribers, we're profitable. We're at 2.5 now, we're gonna be at 4 by the end of the quarter. Or Netflix comes in and offers us well over $1 billion. So at that point, we make the decision not to sell. Now, what I also don't know that happens at that board meeting is Carl decides not to pay John his agreed to bonus.
It didn't sit right with me. Honestly, if they'd come and they said, this is a significant bonus, a lot of, the stock price, didn't have a great year, I don't know, I might have given some consideration, but it wasn't going to be unilaterally them deciding to violate my contract and not pay me what I earned.
When we first heard about John Aniaco facing off Carl Icahn, we knew he had his hands full.
We didn't have any control over it, so we were just watching, not really knowing what was going to happen.
You can't have a business that's fighting for its life in an environment which is changing daily and not have a board who aren't supporting you, challenging you, but supporting you. The agendas were different. I don't know quite what the agenda was, but it certainly wasn't the agenda of making Blockbuster successful because they didn't contribute to that.
It was time for a change. I had I'd been successful enough financially. I was at a time in my life where I wanted to spend more time at home and family. So it just seemed like the right time to transition to business to someone else.
John sits us all down. He says he's gonna leave. Which was a tough day for all of us. It was like knife in the heart. And says they're gonna launch a search and bring in a new CEO. And we're all thinking digital expertise, movie background, something to transition us into this new space.
My hope was that they would give the job to Nick Shepard, the president and COO of the company, who understood the business, understood the challenges, and I think understood what Blockbuster had to do to move forward in the business. Instead, they made a different decision.
Jim Key is now our CEO, gets us all up to Rough Creek Ranch. First question he asks us, he gets us all in a room and he says, who here thinks Blockbuster's in a lot of trouble going bankrupt? And everybody raises their hand but me. And Jim looks at me and he says, Shane, how are you not raising your hand? And I said, well, Jim, we have an offer to sell the company. If we're going to not invest in the online business, let's just sell the company and we'll get rid of all the debt.
You do the math, that's $1 billion. And so that's a very attractive number, especially if you've got $720 million worth of debt on your balance sheet.
Jim had a $1 billion tagline that he wanted to say, movies anyway. And in that $1 billion tagline, you had to keep the online business operational because you could deliver it in the store, you could deliver it digitally, and you could deliver it by mail.
Working 18, 20-hour days for months on end, and to have that being told that we're going to be done with the online deal and we're going to re-engage the stores felt like a kind of a losing proposition.
When we heard Jim Keyes say we're going to make the stores great again, we thought, really?
The day was coming for the end of the store. That was the point where we realized, okay, we think we've won now.
When he exited Blockbuster Total Access, I knew it was not a good sign. In fact, so much so that I said, I'm going to buy some Netflix stock. And I did. And I bought a lot of Netflix stock.
I remember poor Jim Keyes was going to buy Circuit City, and that was just like, wow, that was like the Titanic is going to merge with the Hindenburg. It was just like, what are you thinking?
I remember being on my back porch, crying. We spent 3 years and we developed a great product. We had them. We were going to be that retailer that actually cannibalized itself, that moved from a store business to a digital platform and transitioned out, and Jim ended it.
It wasn't long after we sort of won that battle, and all of a sudden we were starting to work on what at the time we called downloading, which didn't materialize that way because the studios wouldn't let the movie be captured on a device, so it became the streaming project. We never gushed profit. We were always operating very leanly and efficiently, and Wall Street always wanted more from us. So then it pivoted to, what do you do about this opportunity to stream movies? And how much we spend on content, and where are we going to get it, and how are we going to get it to the TV?
What I remember most is a lot of conversation about trying to figure out how to convince consumers that this made sense and wasn't the craziest thing they'd ever heard.
The first 2 years, it was free. The idea, at that time, no one knew how to hook up their internet to their television in their living room. And so there was a whole kind of learning, like, is it worth it? How do you do it? Can I only watch it on my laptop?
The first thing, again, that I did was I sat down with a lot of TV executives to try to figure out, what is this right that we're trying to acquire?
And the studios began to strike distribution deals that they considered found money. They were taking advantage of the dupes at Netflix by charging exorbitant fees for the right to stream content. And Starz was one of the first to strike a deal with Netflix that provided access to Disney films and to Sony films, like Spider-Man 3.
I know what it feels like. It feels good. The power.
This was a pivotal moment in the development of the streaming service. It finally gave Netflix access to mainstream cinematic content that it could use to build and popularize its streaming service.
This was a wonderful, easy payday. I license content to Netflix, I get money, I make my quarterly numbers. This is great. What they've discovered, though, as they've gone further, is that at a macro level, what they were doing was actually helping Netflix get big. That Netflix got big on the backs of their content, and then once they were big enough, they were able to create their own content, and they didn't need the studios as much.
I mean, a real key moment for Netflix was when it realized it should be on every single device, from your phone to your PC, to your gaming console, to your streaming box.
Xbox 360 will be the only game system that lets members who are also Netflix subscribers instantly watch more than 10,000 movies and TV episodes, more than doubling our current content offering.
By 2010, it was pretty clear that you did not really have a new hardware platform unless Netflix was on it. And so it was completely logical that when Apple announced the first iPad that year, they really played up Netflix being one of the first apps. Later in 2010, Apple had an event where they had Reed Hastings come out on stage to talk about the fact that Netflix was arriving on the iPhone.
And it's my pleasure to introduce Netflix CEO, Reed Hastings.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Reed.
2 months ago, we launched the Netflix application for the iPad, and it's been a tremendous success for us. It's now one of our fastest growing platforms. It's just incredible. The customer ratings in the App Store are some of the highest of any application. It's been one of the top 10 most downloaded applications in all of the App Store. And in particular, in the entertainment category, the Netflix app has been the #1 most downloaded application.
Well, Blockbuster is getting ready for a bankruptcy filing in mid-September. According to the LA Times, the home rental company informed 6 major Hollywood movie studios about the plan last week. Blockbuster has lost more than $1 billion since 2008. It's carrying about the same amount of debt. Now, the paper says that Blockbuster plans to close between 500 and 800 stores this year.
There wasn't any great joy, or there wasn't any backslapping or anything. It was like business as usual.
Not that Netflix did anything other than not go out of business while Blockbuster was screwing up.
It's a shame, but it's the reality of the business that Blockbuster was in the store business. There was nothing that was going to save video rental stores.
Hello, welcome to Blockbuster. Can I help you find something? I can't find Turner and Hooch. Where is Turner and Hooch? Oh, I believe we have that over in the... Oh, I get it. Video stores are so old they have ghosts in them. Okay, thanks. I get it. But you're wrong.
I do remember the South Park episode. The common perception was we were going away, and that was just, that was their way of talking about it.
It was really sad to see that a Blockbuster, and there were plenty of other chains, got put out by Netflix. That I think was the first indication by the industry. They're like, oh, these people are doing something innovative.
Reed Hastings is brilliant. Reed is a visionary.
At the strategic points, I think Reed brought that vision with the subscription, with the focus on downloadable. It was, from the beginning, that was in his head and in his ideas.
Reed is the smartest guy I've ever known.
Every time he had an idea, it was just exciting, and it was like, well, maybe that will work.
He was
really a visionary who saw the streaming.
In the context of this time where Netflix had just launched, very successful in Latin America, growth was at expectations. US growth was off the charts. Everything Netflix did turned to gold. Netflix was invincible, it was unstoppable, and we kind of knew that.
We never at any point in the streaming business said, you have to protect the DVD side. We said, let's grow this business, and it might have a little impact on DVD. It might have a negative impact on our DVD business, but it's going to grow the overall.
Eventually in 2010, the belief was you could separate out the two services. And of course that was a huge challenge at that time. There was the raising of the price, there was the separating of the services.
We're making this video today to apologize in person, or at least on camera, for something that we did recently.
The video, Reed apologized for the price increase, admitting that he slid into arrogance and said that was, we wish we had announced the price increase differently, which is why we're now taking the time on video with Andy Rendich to explain how DVD and streaming are separating.
We think that the DVD service needs its own brand so that we can advertise it. So we've named our DVD service Quickster.
Quickster was the name given to what was to be the DVD by mail company. All the DVD by mail subscribers were going to go have their own account. It's going to be its own company. Andy Rendich was named CEO. They had their own office space. They moved out of the building. Netflix management meetings were separated. And it was truly a division of the two entities. And consumers hated it. It was the right strategy, but it was implemented far too aggressively. I remember actually more of the fallout than the actual filming, because Saturday Night Live did a parody of the video that Reed and Andy Rendich shot.
Did we spell a Quickster in a normal way? No, we didn't.
No.
Q-W-I-K. Annoying, but easier.
Right. Yeah, and by the way, we know it's off-putting to see the CEO of a powerful company rocking a goatee and teal shirt, but trust us. We know what we're doing.
You know you're a successful company when you became the source of parody.
The whole Quickster debacle, that was not the first time that influencers turned against Netflix, or that I'd seen influencers turn against other companies. That's part of the dynamics. You're tapping into people's primal passion.
There was significant backlash. Netflix lost 880,000 subscribers, almost 1 million subscribers. The punishment by the market was severe. They devalued Netflix by about 70% of its market cap in about 3 months. And that lasted for about a year.
When I first read the news about Quickster and saw the community up in arms about this unbelievable, horrendous, disastrous thing that had taken place, all I could think to myself is, oh my God, I know exactly what's going on here. Reed was looking at the business and saying, I have to be willing to sacrifice the business, which is the past, and put everything I have on the business, which is the future. And where I did that with several thousand customers, he was doing it with 30 or 40 million customers. And I said, oh my God, that may not have been handled perfectly, but that is one of the most courageous things I've seen an entrepreneur do.
For us, navigating the unknown is always the future. Using this kind of data that we have, which can help us identify great filmmakers and great actors, and the size of audiences for certain shows and all those things, we set out to begin to produce a Netflix original series. And that first one is House of Cards.
When Netflix announced we're going to start dipping our toes into original programming, I think a lot of Hollywood thought, wait a minute, these are the guys who just mail us our DVDs, and they're streaming movies now too, but what does this really mean in the big picture?
What is it you want? Your absolute, unquestioning loyalty.
And I remember seeing this big billboard with Kevin Spacey for House of Cards, and I was like, what is this new show? And so I was on Netflix. I was like, well, Netflix, that's where I get my movies from every week, but I never thought of it as a place to go to watch original programming.
The idea that we had to kind of out-angle everybody else to get it on Netflix, the story behind that really was us convincing David Fincher that this would be a great place to take this really risky bet for himself, coming out of feature film and into a TV series. And the way that we got him excited about it was pointing out to him how different it was going to be from every other kind of television.
They actually outbid HBO. HBO was kind of vying for that as well, the David Fincher series, because a big production. You have David Fincher, Kevin Spacey. Who wouldn't want the project? But Netflix threw $100 million at it for 2 seasons. I was like, wow, they just outpunched HBO, you know, which always, for me, is the premium of all premium networks. So I was really impressed with that.
I know it's changed how we think about how we're going to watch television. I don't think anybody's going to reserve a night for a show from here on. I think people are going to expect it to change for them. That, you know, if you want any sort of serialized storytelling form, then you should have it available as the consumer can consume it. And we don't have those lives that we used to be able to organize around Thursday nights anymore.
Yeah, being a part of something like that gets people talking, whether they were talking about it or not, is always nice.
And they've really kind of changed what is water cooler talk. It's instant. People are talking about it right away on social media. You look at shows like 13 Reasons Why, Stranger Things, The Crown, Orange is the New Black.
I think Orange is the New Black really set Netflix apart from your cable providers and broadcasters, because it had this huge cast of just really diverse women that we really haven't seen before, women that aren't featured in a lot of content. Some brand new actresses were introduced that people have fallen in love with over the years.
A lot of us in the very first year of this show, most of us did not have any fame or anything like that, and we really went through this journey together.
It's also the true representation of what the world is. I know diversity is a trend now, but this is what it really is, and the stories that are being told and that we've been working on have connected not only in America but throughout the world.
It was a brilliant move on their part to go the original programming route, because of course we see where they are today, this powerhouse. People want their shows on Netflix.
You know Will? Do you know where he is? Hiding. From who?
I work really hard on everything that I'm involved in, and I'm doing it so that it reaches audiences. So that when it turns out to be something like Night at the Museum or Stranger Things or Arrival, things that find a big audience, that's very, very satisfying, because it means that this story that I found interesting connected with millions of people around the world. So that's the best part of that success.
I think there's data, they actually know what I watch, but I don't think they recommend stuff that I'll like. I think they recommend stuff because they need to justify that they made an investment in it, because they love bragging on earnings calls about the ROI on the $90 million they spent making Bright, which was a piece of crap, by the way. You know, as was the Cloverfield Paradox, a piece of crap. And they bragged, oh yeah, Super Bowl ad was worth it. We had more views of that movie. Well, had you heard of the Cloverfield Paradox before the Super Bowl? No, I had. Because I cover movie theaters and I knew Paramount was making it and had delayed it twice and canceled it, and Netflix bought a piece of crap and then recommended it to all of us. And they're like, ROI. I think that hurts them. I think if they have you watch crap, you are far more likely to go, I hate this company and I don't want to be a subscriber anymore.
What's really interesting about the amount of money Netflix spends is they're spending tens of billions of dollars on their original programming and acquisitions. They're not making that back. Does it matter to them right now? I don't think so. I think they have a much longer term plan in place.
They can spread out the cost of their content over millions and millions of subscribers. That gives them the ability to pay more than a studio that's got to make money on that particular film. So today I think they see them as a huge competitor, both on the content side as well as the distribution.
I do a lot of work with Netflix, and I like the fact that stories are stories. That old idea that, well, there's movies up here and then there's TV, no, that's obsolete. Now there's just good stories, and it doesn't matter whether you watch them on a big screen or a laptop or a phone. The strength of good storytelling is everywhere now, and I think that that's a really good thing.
Hollywood talent, actors, A-listers probably weren't taking this very seriously at first.
It doesn't affect our process of making the film in any obvious ways. It may, before we get to shooting, in terms of what you're talking about, or does it reach the most people? It definitely has something to do with the way films are marketed.
I think it helps get films out to the world. Films that I wouldn't see that are being done in different parts of the world, filmmakers from the Philippines or India or wherever. These little movies that you get to see now
And these filmmakers that are really talented that you get to finally see their work, and it's inspiring to see that. It hurts it only because they see everything now. So you have to really try to challenge yourself to bring something new and something special to the audience. They could binge all night long.
The internet is transforming so many sectors of our economy, and we're internet TV, and that sector has grown from very small 15 years ago to starting to be significant now. And in the next 10 or 20 years, internet TV is going to be all of TV.
I think Netflix has changed Hollywood because their model is unlike anything that we've seen before.
Netflix is not changing the global market, it's totally revolutionizing it. We have a system in France. First, the movie are released in theaters, and then 18 months later, they're on Canal Plus or pay TV or the pay TVs, and then we have them on network television.
I think that Netflix is a machine that brings your passions out. Either you hate it or you love it. Let's say if you're a small distribution company and you only distribute theatrical, Netflix is not going to be your friend.
I mean, the kids, they're not watching TV anymore. They're going back to that. They're watching their show however they want, on whatever they want, on their phone, on their tablets, on their computers. They don't watch TV anymore, and when they watch TV, they watch Netflix on TV with their parents.
The studios, they're not sure what to do about that. I mean, they do the tentpole movies. They make, the big Avengers movies that come out, and like these are the movies that millions of people are gonna go see and make billions of dollars. But in the long term, what do we do to keep people watching our stuff in between the 3 or 4 years it takes to make one of these tentpole films? And I think they're reacting to that. I think it's causing a lot of these mergers to take place, like Fox Disney and AT&T and Time Warner, to compete to pool all their resources together. That's why Disney is coming out with their own streaming platform, because they want to be like, hey, you want to come watch our stuff? Not going to be on Netflix anymore. You got to come to us.
I mean, Netflix is valued like a Silicon Valley company, but as they start to look more and more like a media company, and as media companies such as Disney try to take on Netflix more directly, at some point you have to ask yourself whether it adds up that the valuations are different.
Warner Brothers was an $84 billion deal. Fox is a $90 billion deal. So Netflix is worth more than Warner Brothers, HBO, and Fox combined. That's crazy. And if you don't think that these studio heads, these CEOs of these companies recognize that, they're bitter about it, they're gonna win back their economic rent.
All the tech giants are competing with Netflix in one way or another. Amazon is doing it very directly with Amazon Prime Video. YouTube now is YouTube TV, which is sort of a cable TV type service. Netflix has such a head start these days that even these really smart companies have a pretty steep road ahead of them.
And Netflix is doing that well. They're spending their money wisely, and you can tell, I mean, they're growing every day.
You're like one of the big new media disruptors. Why did the entertainment industry need to be disrupted?
I think people in our industry gravitate to disruption because of the challenge, because it's a sense of change and impact in what we can do. And to be able to watch TV shows anytime you want, it's a nice friendly kind of disruption.
Midnight that Sunday night, my phone starts ringing. And ringing, text coming through, you gotta see this, you gotta see this, you gotta do it, you gotta do it. What are you talking about?
Despite the fact that Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy in 2010, there are apparently 4 independently owned franchises still operating in the United States, 3 of which are in Alaska.
So I got up the next morning and watched the clip, and then I started to understand what he had done.
It does sound like something that we would do. Buy Russell Crowe's jockstrap and send it to one of the last remaining Blockbusters in Alaska. Even that sentence is absolutely incredible to say out loud.
And the deal is that we want to buy this stuff, and we think we want to give it to the last Blockbusters in Alaska to help out their business. Okay, great deal.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
It did generate a lot of traffic, a lot from tourists that knew about it. And they would come in just to see that. Of course, we'd try to sell them something when they came in, but a lot of people didn't buy anything. But yeah, there's no doubt it generated traffic. Unfortunately, it didn't help it enough.
Alaska's last 2 Blockbuster video stores are calling it quits, leaving just 1 store
open in the U.S. The closures come just 2 months after the host of HBO's Last Week Tonight with John Oliver sent film memorabilia to the Anchorage store, which displayed it in an effort to ramp up business. The closures will leave the Blockbuster in Bend, Oregon, as the sole holdout.
The nostalgia effect of the closure of these last few stores has exceeded anything I anticipated. And you can see by all the national press that picked up these stories, you know, it added to the negative emotion of all of it. But it's business, you know, we had no choice.
War is a universal language.
You know, the one true of the entertainment industry always has been, you know, producers want to distribute and distributors want to produce and actors want to direct. And so it's everyone always has a fantasy about doing the other thing. And ultimately what they want to do is get the best return on investment for their content. And Netflix turns out to be the best way that they can get that return in this space. And if they thought they could do it better and bigger on their own, they probably would. And they have experimented over the years. And they have always not worked out well because it's a very different expertise.
The reason AT&T is particularly interesting is because they might be able to use their ownership over the pipe to say, you can get lower cost access to my streaming service than you could to Netflix, because with Netflix, you're gonna have to pay for your data, whereas with my service, I'm gonna give you the data for free.
The one company that always terrified Netflix is Amazon, because Amazon, you know, like a few other companies, can subsidize content through selling, you know, dog food and barbecues and things like that.
Netflix has a couple of unique advantages, right? One is they have this head start, both acquiring the customers and they've got a head start on creating their own unique content. They're able to use the content to attract customers and use the customers to attract great creators who want to make content.
I think there's going to be, you know, 6 or so big players like Amazon, Hulu, Disney, Netflix, and then hundreds of niche players that cater to every different choice out there.
I don't know. It's that whole thing of theater versus seeing it on your television. I'm glad if people see it. I don't care so much what format.
Well, I think that's something you learn early in life. Movies are for the world, and I never make a movie without knowing how it is going to travel the world.
I just hope the discussion between Netflix and platforms in general and theatrical should be over. I think that those guys should get together and just realize that whatever they're doing with discussion is hurting cinema. They both together, they can elevate cinema. And more important, they can create a diversity in cinema.
I think the legacy our founding team gave Netflix was building a fantastic foundation of creative innovation.
When your company becomes a verb, then means you achieve success. So when people started saying Netflix did, it felt really, really great.
There were proof points along the way that we knew that we were doing our job of embedding Netflix in popular culture, making Netflix a household name in America.
It goes back to disrupting an old way of doing things and making people's movie experience better. And to be part of that is something that, you know, I look back on and say, yeah, that's pretty cool.
I'm incredibly proud of the fact that this tiny group of people took a chance.
I trust that the things that we established at the very beginning, that the fundamentally important thing about this business was provide entertainment that people love. That if you can just keep on doing that, that as long as people like consuming entertainment, there's going to be a place for a company like Netflix.
We were listening to a Netflix phone call.
And Reed Hastings gets on one of the earnings calls and he says, they've thrown everything at us but the kitchen sink.
At which point Ed Stead got up, left the conference room, came back later, I don't know, within an hour and said, I just mailed Netflix a kitchen sink.
And a couple of days later, this large carton crate arrived at the Netflix office, and we pried it open, and it was a kitchen sink.
I think I remember seeing it and saying, what? Why? Perhaps that's why they're not doing well. They're taking time to do things like this.
Well done, Ed. And to Reed's credit, he sent me an email the next day thanking me for the kitchen sink.